All right, everyone. I am just so excited to have all of you here today. Thank you for working with us through our Zoom troubleshooting. I will assure you that in future months, we will have a different platform setup, but this is our first of the year, and we're just so excited to have you along for the ride. We are delighted today to welcome Dr. Casey Myers. He's a nationally respected author, researcher, and leader in PR, law, and ethics. And he happens to be professor of public relations and director of graduate studies at Virginia Tech School of Communication. He is the author of 8 books and numerous scholarly and professional publications exploring public relations strategy, history, and legal issues. His most recent book, Artificial Intelligence and Law in the Communication Professions, which was published in June 2025, examines how emerging laws and regulations are shaping AI's role across PR, journalism, and advertising. Many of you will remember Dr. Myers when he presented to PRSA Oregon in June of 2025. Well, today he'll be sharing what's new since then, and he'll also talk to us about what we as communication leaders can do to navigate trust, credibility, ethical responsibility in this changing landscape. So, many of you also will know that Dr. Myers serves on the PRSA National Board of Directors and the Board of Ethics and Professional Standards, where he was instrumental in developing PRSA's updated ethical guidance, Promise and Pitfalls, the Ethical Use of AI, version 2.0. He's also legal research editor for the Institute of Public Relations and a frequent national media commentator. We're so glad to have him back today. And if you have any questions along the way, please just drop those into chat and we'll be sure that he gets to them. So here we are. Welcome, Dr. Myers. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It is great being back here with you. And we're talking about something that I think is extremely interesting, which is how ethics and AI have changed. So for those of you, just to give it a little background, PRSA BEPS, the Board of Ethics and Professional Standards, wrote a promises and pitfalls several years ago about AI issues and ethics. I was part of that group. And if you will recall 2022, or you are, kind of familiar with that era of AI, a lot of what was going on in the industry is, do we use it? Do we not use it? How do you make a decision? Do we need to be transparent in our use? Is this going to erode our field? Is it going to take away jobs? There's a lot of fear and uncertainty. And so that particular ethical guideline was really at the forefront of an emergent technology where there were so many unknowns. And so we came back several years later and we were tasked to create an update. And the update is okay, we know now that AI and PR is ubiquitous. This is something that's all over our industry. It's being used for generative content creation. It's being used for predictive analysis, sentiment analysis, media messaging, all of the things that we all use in our daily practice of PR. So now, knowing that we're I wouldn't say it's a mature technology yet, but it is certainly more mature than it was at the beginning of our 1.0 version of this guidance. So what does that mean for us? Like where are the industry standards now? What do we need to think about? And so this anticipates that. I will say this, a couple of things before we get into the PowerPoint. The 2.0 version is available to you as a PRSA member behind a My PRSA paywall that you have as a member. As I oftentimes log in there to see what kind of content PRSA has nationally. So just a little short plug for that. There's a lot of good content there. You can access this document and some other resources that are part of your member benefit. So take a look at that. And I don't want to be reiterative of what's on the document because it's pretty comprehensive. The other thing is that within the PRSA ethical community, one of the things that BEPS does is it looks at emergent trends and it looks at it through the code of ethics. But it's not prescriptive in a way like this is always or never. Ethical issues within PR operate in a gray scale. And so we have oftentimes questions that present these paradoxical sort of solutions. And I think this document tries to anticipate that. The document also tries to anticipate a shifting regulatory environment. And those who are following AI in the news know that we have a real three-dimensional political situation, both domestically in the United States with regulation, federal regulation versus state regulation, but also international standards that oftentimes differ in their prioritization of issues of risk, issues of use, and transparency. So as we think about that from a practitioner standpoint, it's an evolving landscape that really puts us back into a situation where we have to to kind of stay up to date, and nothing is going to remain static in this technology. So let's just go to the first slide here. Um, I don't think I can change the slides. All right. So what are the ethical issues? So the big ethical issues, and these are things we saw in 2020s, early 2020s, 2022 or so, transparency. What does transparency mean in AI? So in the early iterations of AI, one of the questions that I would get when we would go to these groups as if they would say, well, we got to disclose AI all the time. Another issue that they were dealing with is how do we explain to clients how we use AI? Because clients would come back and say, if you're going to use AI for this, then we're not going to pay for that, or we're going to use AI for certain aspects of your campaign, or you're just blanketly not going to be able to use AI. I think technology has kind of changed that reality a little bit because, I can't do a Google search without AI assistance embedded in it, just like in a Word document now has, Copilot embedded in it on my machine. So it's really not a situation where I can get away or any of us can get away from AI completely unless we're just, low tech analog technology only. Deliberativeness and use. This is an interesting concept because what it does is it presents an ethical question about what does it mean to be a human being. So in AI, we have great capacity for aggregate analysis and decision making. So you imagine, like, if I was going to look at, let's say, some sort of strategy, I just type in a query and the AI comes up with this great output. Well, do I just wholesale accept that? Do I not accept that? Do I question its truthfulness? How do I do a fact check on that? How do I do an internal audit on that? And so that gets us to some questions about, okay, well, who is responsible? And there's a quote that I have here that'll express sort of the BEPS position on that, I think pretty articulately. Governance is another big issue. The governance issue is one that is kind of at scale. So we have like the actual laws and governance that we see within the United States and with it globally. We also have governance internally. And I think that the BEPS document really does talk about that, about creating AI policy. That's the next frontier. In the late 2000s, like 2010s, to 2015, I was doing a lot of research about social media policy. And there was all of this question about how do we create good social media policies for issues of reputation management. Now we're in the same space with AI. The difference is that AI is more rapidly evolving than social media evolved. So the evergreen quality of the policies is not as evergreen. The other thing is that there's so many constituent groups within an organization. So our publics, our stakeholders, they have to be brought into that conversation. And the guidance really talks about that. Like, are you bringing in the tech people? Are you bringing in the legal people? Are you bringing in, the frontline employee people into this conversation and how they're going to be represented? So I see a question in the chat about the PDF of the slides. Absolutely, I've given that to Kellyanne to distribute afterwards. So happy to do that. Bias is another issue. What is the decision making process? So a lot of AI literature is alarmist, and it'll talk about AI is going to do these things that strips out human agency. There's all of this hallucinated content, and that's a real concern. But it's also a tool that is both a bias detector and a facilitator of bias. So it goes both ways. that gets back to this sort of decision making that you're going to have within AI technology. I can have a great output or what appears to be a great output, but the way that the output comes about goes through sort of uh, a skewed process, and that we may not be aware of because on the user end experience, the user is there to get the output and say, well, it screened all these resumes and these are the top 5 candidates according to the algorithm. And so that algorithmic dependence is something that we really have to take note of. The other thing is on the hallucination side, hallucinations have become extremely good. Just as on the academic side, you can go into AI and ask it things, and um, it'll produce content that looks real, studies that look real. On the legal side, there's a huge issue within the law where AI hallucinates case law and statutes, and then if you're a person that relies on that without fact checking it, you may be putting out something that is totally artificial but has the it's kind of the veneer of reality. And then decision making. How are we going to use this to make decisions? The ultimate ethical guidelines here go back and say the practitioner makes the decisions. You're ultimately responsible. If we're going to implement any technology, whether it is AI or something like the internet or a social media platform or a fax machine, it is up to us to determine how we're using the technology. It's not us. It is not the technology that imposes its will on us, and then we somehow have to be subservient to it. It is a tool. And there's a larger kind of philosophical discussion around that, which is if it does become a tool that we overly depend on and it erodes our own ability to make decisions, then what does that say about the vulnerability of us as professionals? And that gets into the question of job displacement, of saying, okay, well, if it can replace you, are you really in some ways by your over dependence and over reliance allowing it to replace you? And that is a bigger concern, I think, just professionally and globally. Let's go to the next slide, please. So PRSA values: advocacy, expertise, fairness, honesty, independence, loyalty. The 2.0 approaches the AI use through these values. And we had a discussion, and we've had a larger discussion, I think, as a profession about, okay, AI is new. Do we need a new ethical guidelines? Like there's these nuanced issues coming up. And one of the things that the Code of Ethics has anticipated in its own iteration since it's been written, and if you read about the history of the Code of Ethics, PRSA created this code early on in its history, and it has been derivatively iterated by other organizations globally as an ethical guideline. And so it's interesting to see just sort of that thought leadership there and what goes into it. Moreover, the code has an evergreen quality to it because these principles and core foundational values of public relations remain the same regardless if we're using AI or we're operating in an analog world or we're doing doing PR services for varying clients. And so again, so from this perspective is the way that we approach AI, not creating a new code of ethics or creating a new sort of approach to PR. It remains the same. Let's go forward one more. So one of the things that the new 2.0 talks about is these best practices. It looks at foundational literacy of AI. And what it means by that is that when we go into AI, there's a lot of people that may have used AI. And in fact, all of us have been using AI for probably much longer than we realize. If we had Gmail, we were using AI when we had those prompts that would write, for us. But do we really understand what we're doing? And that requires us to study. And I know, as an academic, when AI came about and really started exploding in 2022, I went back and did an executive program on AI and business leadership and understanding the technology. I just recently put in for to be a part of a cohort that is going to be studying AI in higher education and how we can use that tool as a teaching tool for our students, but also as a course designer and kind of these like pitfalls within the technology. So we're constantly, even those of us who are in a space of education constantly, we're still having to go back to school and learn. And that's just part of being an up-to-date professional. And so the 2.0 version really talks about foundational literacy. Data protection and privacy. This is another best practice, and it requires us, it goes back to that deliberativeness of decision. So data protection comes in the form of inputs into the system from us in the form of queries. And so one of the things that AI does really well is it can take data and it can analyze that data and generate some sort of predictive analysis based on it. And PR, even going back pre kind of AI explosion, was the real industry trend in the 2010s was big data analytics, because data analytics allowed you to do targeted micro messaging that then resonated with publics in the most direct way, rather than just this sort of blasting of communications and hoping that there was resonance. And so that gets into this sort of more nuanced targeting. And it's not just the PR industry, but advertising marketing is capitalized on this as well. And ultimately, they've been able to capitalize on it and charge clients a lot for those services if you know how to do data analytics. On the back end of that is this growing awareness of privacy issues and giving up private information that then can be used in aggregate to do this targeting. And so that data protection is important. And it becomes even more important if you are in a highly regulated comms industry. So there's a lot of opportunity for like healthcare communication and AI, but there's also a lot of, foundational data protection in healthcare through HIPAA. Same thing with higher ed with FERPA. Same thing with financial services through financial services privacy acts. And so that's something that we really have to be cognizant of, and not unwittingly just putting in information, but also kind of understanding what the system's doing with the information. Like, is this open or closed system? What's that foundational literacy aspect? What's the audits that you're doing within some of your systems, like if you have a proprietary AI system? Responsible use. This gets to both the idea that people are making conscious decisions about AI, knowing what it can and cannot do, particularly around high stakes decision making. So you can see, and maybe like in the human resources world, a lot of opportunity for AI decision making on things like performance evaluations. But do they take context into consideration? A big issue right now in AI use is, how do you responsibly use it in hiring? And there's a lot of concern around bias, and that gets to the next point there, the critical evaluation and bias awareness. So biased outputs on hiring is something that people are very concerned about, particularly in these application pools where you have a large aggregate amount of resumes that cannot be human screened. Then they use that through a screening process that then pulls out a finalist list. But that finalist list is ultimately replicative of other people that have been hired. So therefore, it may be just sort of like an echo chamber of the same kind of people being put in these interviews. And so is there an overview, a human oversight overview, and then there's a stress test audit. And I don't know that they're quite have figured out how to do something like that at scale and mandate that legally. There's certain laws that have been out there to try to do that, but ultimately that's an ethical question as well. And those are considerations that go back to that foundational literacy. Then mis and disinformation. So we are now in a position as an industry where AI can fight mis and dis and recognize it and facilitate it in such a way that it is just seamless in its outputs. And then the regulatory side has really put the onus back on the industry to self-regulate. So certain AI systems will or will not create certain types of content. And if you have no guardrails, you have an AI system that can produce a lot of mis and disinformation. And we're seeing this trickle down in the PR side. So I have talked to several PR practitioners in the last year who have maybe an organization that a person is taking generative AI and creating maybe reviews or creating some sort of website with some type of interface of their organization, and then monetizing that. And then that actually does not represent what the organization or event or whatever the client is in reality. And they're dealing with this kind of AI. It's an AI generated disinformation that is really affecting reputation management. And it's not necessarily negative. It's just highly, highly inaccurate. And so I see a lot of that And the people that are in this space, a lot of them are in hospitality tourism. And so that is a real kind of concern that I think is going to be percolating up more in our industry as we move forward. Just how to do reputation management on AI. Now, we've talked about like search engine optimization, but what about things like AI optimization? And is there such a thing? And how do we handle AI optimization? So go to the next slide, please. So this is a philosophy of AI that the Promises and Pitfalls says. It says AI is not a peer with moral responsibility. Accountability belongs to people. What matters most is leading it, explaining it, and using it in ways that are ethical, transparent, and build trust. And so this is really what we are advocating here within the Promises and Pitfalls. So that is the philosophy. It is back on the individual user. We go to the next slide, please. Do we need a new code in the AI world? Well, that is a question we talked about a little bit. The code of ethics is evergreen, and we present things through this code of ethics that is supposed to be looking at the same values that we've always had within the PR industry. And so, again, it produces paradoxical questions, but it doesn't necessarily produce new ethical solutions or new ethical guideposts. Honesty and transparency are the same in the AI world as any other. So the Promises and Pitfalls does anticipate that from that perspective. Let's go to the next slide, please. So AI strategy, research, creative development, media distribution, engagement, performance operations, and talent. These are all areas that the guideline really does look for as it anticipates AI use in the industry. So the document has a section in it that talks about various issues that are coming up within AI in these categories, and it's just so voluminous. I don't want to reiterate it in the presentation, but those categories are specifically mentioned and specifically addressed. And then there's examples of how they can go awry and what people should do. And I'm going to talk about some of these in the following slides, but to just give you a flavor of what the document provides and that you can read. And I think it's something that would really be a good discussion point for those of you who may be looking at this for further kind of trainings or further developments on teams for ethical considerations. Let's go forward one. Issues with AI. The document, the 2.0, also talks about erosion of skills, the erosion of trust within the industry. So PR is transparent, and its ethical code drives a lot of concern around professional legitimacy. And so the erosion of trust, it's not just the erosion of trust in communications, but the erosion of trust within the PR world. And so in the PR profession. And so that's one of the reasons why this is such a forefront issue. Erosion of privacy, erosion of accountability on the behalf of users, and the erosion of human agency. And by that, I mean the ability of a human being to make their own decisions and make their own actual, have an autonomous control over technology. And so again, that is not just on the user side, but on the recipient side as well, with mis and disinformation. If people are processing false information as a part of a decision-making process, that erodes agency as well. Let's go forward one, please. So AI literacy, foundational literacy, the Promise and Pitfalls talks about training of staff, sourcing of AI. Not all AI systems are the same. Not all the data is the same. Not all the algorithms are the same. Creating AI policies. We talked about that. Bringing in core constituency groups, and then fact checking. And that fact checking is important. And fact checking falls back to the human being to be in charge of their own sort of AI system. And so that it talks about this at length within the Promises and Pitfalls, and that literacy is something that is part of that ongoing education. Next slide. Protection of data privacy. The way that the Promises and Pitfalls addresses this is through audits of systems. So it talks about AI systems, and this really is a conversation that is necessitated. It necessitates a conversation between communicators and users and program designers. So in an industry, if you're going proprietary or using a vendor or something like that, you have to have more sophisticated questions that go beyond just like what is output, but like what is the decision-making mechanism here, and how does this data, what is it doing with data? How's it storing the data? What is it? Is it training on this that can be then extrapolated to other people? So again, it's one of those things where it requires us to do a lot of literacy and a lot of homework before we come into these discussions. And this also gets into conversations about compliance with regulation, and we'll get to this in a second. But regulations are in flux, and what we're seeing now is states stepping in to create regulations on AI. And certain states are way at the forefront, like California is very much at the forefront of AI regulation. Other states are more a wait and see approach. All states have some level of AI laws that are in place or are being explored. That creates some inherent tensions with the federal government because of the issue of federalism and the issues of, do these conflicts of state laws create, problems for compliance? And so these are real questions that have to be ironed out. And this will continue to be an issue for the next 5 years or so, I would suspect, until we get comprehensive regulation on AI or until we can get sort of uniformity in some of these cases. And I'll get to that in a few seconds. But one of the big issues is we have certain states that interpret things like AI fair use and training of data differently. And so what does that mean? Is this a violation of copyright rights to train on pre-existing data or not? And that's an unresolved legal question. And then this closed versus AI system use, that's a big question that's emergent with people. What is the data being, how is it stored and how is it used, and who can access it? Can other users maybe put in a query and have my information that I put in produced in their results? And those are some real important questions to ask as we engage with the technology. Let's go forward. Responsible use. Keep a human gatekeeper in the sense of how the AI is going to be, the final decision is made. Disclosure of use. This is an evolving question too. Do I disclose use all the time, or do I disclose it some of the time? How do we differentiate between high stakes and low stakes disclosure? The promises and pitfalls does not give a bright line rule for that, but it does anticipate the idea that if you are like modifying reality for people, like let's say deep fake AI, that is something that requires some sort of disclosure because you're changing reality. But would you disclose like brainstorming on AI for a strategic plan or something? I don't know. That is an internal question. Issue management and workshops. So issue management and workshops requires that ongoing kind of education. And then lastly, deliberate uploads. So the question there is, I upload documents to create content, and this uploading of documents could potentially reveal proprietary information. It could reveal sensitive information about my organization or clients or individuals. Make sure that when we are inputting content, we're keeping that privacy component in mind. Let's go forward one. Bias awareness. AI advisory groups, internal guidelines, document use, monitoring, prioritizing human decision making is all steps to eliminate bias. But bias is going to be there because what AI is this iterative of pre-existing human knowledge, and human knowledge is by its nature biased because it has perspective, and as such, we have to just be aware of AI perspective. It's a somewhat an insidious problem because AI systems prioritize user experience. So it wants you to get what you want from it. And so as I put in information and it says, Casey really likes this. He likes these kinds of sources. He likes this kind of philosophy. This is his philosophical approach to the world. It's going to give me more of that. And it may take away perspective that I need to know in order to make a more informed decision strategically and just as a professional or as a human being. So it's not just bias in the sense that there's this, raw bias in the data or algorithm, but it's a nuanced, subtle bias that is almost tailored to the user to make them not see it. And so that requires a certain degree of self-awareness, not just technological awareness, but personal self-awareness on the AI. So some people get around this by prompting, and this is not a prompting workshop, but one thing that people do is they will say, "Can you give me the most counter argument to this perspective that you can? And how would a person from a radically different perspective view this? And can you design communications around that? How that would have, how they would uh, be persuaded if you were trying to advocate or something." So again, that involves a lot of kind of user responsibility and interplay. But again, it's one of those things that's important to just keep in mind as we go forward in kind of our own use, just being aware. It's kind of interesting. The more we talk about artificial intelligence, what we're really talking about is human intelligence and just how important that is. And this is one of those key parts. Let's go forward, please. Transparency, a big buzzword, in PR, but it is like disclosure, acknowledgement, communicate with the team. What can we use this for? What can we not use this for? I'll give you an anecdote. There are certain things that even with my own position, we're expressly banned from using AI for, because we want to maintain privacy and we want to maintain integrity of the process. One of the major things would be anything to do with personally identifying information of people in a work setting, or certainly anything that deals with proprietary secrets or proprietary information, trade secrets and industry standards and things like that. So again, this is all one of those things that I think that there are um, there are issues that emerge that we have to be transparent about, but it also means that there are going to be limits to what we can use AI for. And that goes back to those policies and procedures and thinking those things through. Let's go forward. Integration, core competency, practice orientations, cross-functional learning, human-centric approach, how we integrate AI into our jobs is important. The Promises and Pitfalls has a section on integration with some scenarios that it goes through. So I would recommend taking a look at that. These really, if you'll notice the theme here, all of this is interrelated ethical considerations. And so it all boils down to competency, and also I think larger conversations, deliberative conversations. And I think that we're in a space where our core competencies and use of AI has gotten past maybe the I don't know what this is and let me just try this out, to really kind of engaging with it in a meaningful way that I think can level up our conversations, particularly around integration of the technology. Let's go forward. And then again, back to our code, the PRSA code of ethics is the guide, the examples and guidance. There's a section there that takes these values and then extrapolates them into different conversations around examples and the use of AI and the way that AI impacts the industry. And so this is sort of just a teaser for that, and something that really kind of I would encourage you to go back and look at, that Promises and Pitfalls and how it has been able to articulate that. And I say this: these are not bright line rules. It's more paradoxical situations, paradoxes of values and ethics and implementation. Let's go forward. So there is a legal and regulatory environment section here, and I could I wrote a book about this, and I could give a whole class on this. Intellectual property is the biggie. Intellectual property in the United States is something that creates a tension within AI development. And the tension is this: people that own copyright and trademarks, they make money off of those. People that own patents, they make money off of those. AI uses a lot of intellectual property to train and create new content that is iterative of old content. Is that infringement? Does that take away money from those who are the owners of this property? Arguably, yes. Arguably, no. That is something that is being sorted out as we move forward. Another thing is AI, generative AI, is really good at producing content fast. It uses that by pulling content that exists and repackaging it. Is that a infringement of intellectual property or not? And some say yes, some say no. The other question is a more nuanced question. In copyright, which is basically the big protection that PR uses for all of its content, that and trademark, but copyright specifically, copyright has a requirement that says copyright has to be original and fixed in a tangible medium. Originality means a modicum of originality. It can't be the phone book. That's not original enough. But anything a little above that is original enough. So it's a low threshold. And then fixation means it can be perceived and it can have some sort of staying power that can be, perceived by the individual. So AI presents this new issue of, well, who is the creator? If I just put in a shallow entry into my AI system and it produces some picture or some content, is that my creation or the AI's creation? And if it's the AI's creation, the law seems to suggest that that doesn't get protection, that that's not copyrighted at all. In fact, that's just public domain use content. Now, what does that mean? That seems like a legalistic issue, but there's a very applied impact on that. If I produce public domain content in my copyrightable material, and that is all I'm producing with these shallow prompts, I don't own my material. And by extension, I don't own my content. And by extension, I can't control it. So what does that mean for the PR person in a reputation management perspective? I don't own what I'm producing. I can't control what I'm producing. Other people can use it at will. So that is a real challenge. On the trademark is a word, symbol, or device. It's the logo, and we know like Nike and Apple and all these famous logos, but there's a lot of more trademarks out there than we don't necessarily recognize that are registered that may be in an AI system. I produce a new logo for my organization. Is that infringement on someone else's logo? Even if I don't know that that logo exists? Potentially, yes. And so that gets back to that personal accountability and understanding kind of what I'm producing. And so these are cases, and if I had to identify an area that's getting regulatorily addressed more rapidly, it is IP. And so for us, IP has a lot tethered to it that gets into how we are producing content. The other issue is that in global PR practice, there is a divergent standard for AI. So the United States wants to be an AI leader. It is the AI leader of the world in terms of creating, systems. There's a thought that overregulation of AI produces a disincentivization for businesses to produce new AI systems. And there's arguments in favor of that. We are in an AI race globally. There's an AI race between the United States and China. There's an AI race between the United States and the European Union. This is a real geopolitical question, and it impacts regulation. So as we have this currently deregulated or underregulated environment to sort of spur on people to create new systems, that produces a lot of questions on the law that may have no clear-cut answer. That then makes us even more responsible as ethical practitioners because we can't turn to a reg and say, this is what the regulation says. We have to then turn to this is what our ethics say and how we're going to operate. So it gives us a lot more autonomy over AI in a way, but it also kind of pushes those questions to us. If you are practicing internationally, particularly in an EU context, the EU has an AI Act, and it grades AI usage by risk. And so there's certain areas of AI, according to its risk level, that it can't be used in. And so it's highly restrictive. And so that high restriction means that, if I were creating content and doing AI work globally, I may have divergent standards depending on where my audiences are or the national space that I'm operating in. That goes with disclosure as well. So disclosure of AI use, this is something that's emergent sort of in advertising more than PR, but they're such interrelated fields that I think it's important for us to kind of look at it just from a kind of almost like a comms perspective. if I'm using AI to do influencing in an advocacy kind of way, so in a paid, ad kind of way, what do I have to disclose there? There have been a lot of criticisms of companies who have used AI to make commercials, and there's been some really good AI commercials that we have all seen. And it cuts down on cost, and the quality is high. But also, does that then require us to disclose to people? Are they somehow deceived through a kind of an AI system? I'll give you another example. AI has the ability to create accessibility for people that is transformative. So you think about, let's say, I wanted to produce information, very important information, and I did a presentation, but I don't speak a particular language, then I deep fake the presentation to make the speaker speak in that language. That creates great accessibility, but it also creates this deep fake reality shift for people. And is that required disclosure? And you think about it, I mean, it's like we always think of like the deep fake as being something that is bad, but it could be potentially good. But again, there's disclosure around that, shifting the reality. Suppose it was something about some sort of public services that is dubbed in a language that appears that the speaker is speaking the language, and it gives the expectation that we have people that speak this language at this services or whatever, or at this doctor's office or wherever the client is. And so these are real kind of dichotomous tensions that we have to resolve. And the law has some addressing on this. The law currently is much more concerned around political disinformation than it is anything like what I'm describing, but I would anticipate that going forward. State and local laws, this is a big issue, and it's emerging as a bigger issue because it's creating this federalism tension. Federal government has some AI regulations, mainly in IP, but it has a real Congress, and several executive orders have come out and said, we're very pro development. We don't want to overregulate. So states step in and they regulate. Now we have this tension of, well, is this overreach by the states? Is this creating conflicts of laws amongst states? So if you were in like a truly national PR practice and you're using AI, could you be using AI that is permissible in one state but impermissible in another? And so this is something that creates a lot of tension on the behalf of the practitioner and the user, and it also creates this default where the person just goes to whatever state's the most stringent, complies with that, and then they're compliant, amongst the national scene. But I think there's going to be an evolving kind of conflict of laws issue here, and it's something that's going to be sorted out in the court system. But I would suspect in the next 2 to 3 years, you'll see more lawsuits about this as a major issue emerging going forward. Let's go forward a slide, please. So future directions, accountability, the promises and pitfalls talks about accountability of the practitioner. Agentic AI, this is this very integrated AI system that's making a lot of decisions and creating content. Cultural misinterpretation. So AI has perspective. It has cultural perspective because of the data has perspective. And like I said, it's not, we think of bias as like someone with a discriminatory intent, but bias can be much more nuanced than that. It could just be perspective bias that excludes information or privileges some information over another based on the perception of the user. It could also just be, this is a perspective based on the data and algorithm that is the data originator's perspective, or maybe the programmer's algorithmic perspective that then provides privileges information over other information. And environmental stewardship and impact. This has been an issue. We were talking in 2022 about this, and I used to have a slide about it, and people would say, well, that's kind of weird. Now we are all hearing about it with AI centers and the electricity that has to be produced. And what does that mean? There's a lot of local communities impacted by AI as well. And so that is something that we consider as well in our own use. And probably these are going to be issues that are not only affecting AI companies, but AI users and organizations that may be partnering with certain AI systems. And so that is all, I think, future kind of ethical dilemmas that we'll face. The promises and pitfalls does anticipate that a little bit and provides a section on it. So something to look for. that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to continue with some questions if we could close out the share screen here. One thing before we get to questions, I would say I would encourage all of you to go to those resources. And PRSA has done a great job in providing more and more resources for members. And it's not just the promises and pitfalls, but there's other um, platforms, excuse me, other documents. And we've also been creating some workshops around AI. I'm participating in one of those now, building it out. This is a certificate program. So that's something that I would encourage you all to take a look at, and as part of your larger kind of membership benefits as a member of this organization.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. That was a whole bunch of information, and I'm curious about what you see since you spoke to us in June as being some of the new developments in AI that have perhaps even grabbed us without really realizing that it's grabbed us.
Well, I would say one area of AI that is really evolving is, well, the one area is ubiquity of use. Like it's everywhere. Everybody's
Mhm.
using AI way more than they did in June of 25. Everyone is being integrated into their job, and I think there's a larger recognition that AI is really important for professional skill development. And I always say to students, you have to bring the skills, the human skills, and the AI skills. And so we're all in this kind of reskilling mode. I don't think that AI undermines the value added that we have as professionals. I will say this: one of the things that I'm seeing percolating on the horizon, though, is when do we reach an AI saturation point? And we're seeing some other questions around the feasibility of implementing widespread AI. So and so at the 2022, 23, 24, there's this growth of AI, and now we're seeing this sort of shifting competitive landscape around AI. Who is going to be the leader in that space? Those are all evolving. And so I used to have a slide when I first did presentations and say, well, this is the predominant platform. It'd be like ChatGPT or something like that. And now we're seeing that is shifting dependent upon the industry. And I have even seen some developments around communications and PR specific AI platforms. And I think that we'll see a lot more of that in the vendor space coming up in the next few years, where people are maybe in their organizations going in-house proprietary um, with their technology, and that again ethically brings up a lot of these issues around uh, education, deliberative use, and understanding the system and the software that you are using.
I have a few more questions, but I'd like to open it up to others to just feel free to turn off your mute button and jump into the conversation. If no one does, I'll go ahead. Okay, so one question I have is, believe it or not, I know some people who still have not jumped into the AI world. So specifically, communicators who may feel pressure to finally get up to speed and adopt AI, where do you see the line between responsible experimentation and ethical overreach?
Well, I would say this. We talked in June about deliberative use in the AI echo chamber and de-skilling. And I would say that there is a space for people to unplug from AI given certain circumstances. I do that. I mean, I like AI as a convenient tool, but at the same time, sometimes you feel like you're cognitively, you can become cognitively dependent upon it. And so I think there's a certain awareness there of, well, it's just easier for me to plug in this query than to actually do this work. But there is value in work, and there's value in that rumination of work and editing and kind of reflective thought. So I don't think that it's everyone needs to jump on AI to do all their work all the time. I think that if you're resistant and you want to maintain as part of your profession this non-AI, I think that's appropriate depending on what it is. I do think that when you are making a decision to implement AI, I think you have to be, I think first of all, you have to be familiar with it, what the technology can do and what it can't do, and how it understands certain phenomena and how it also produces outputs. And sometimes it does a really great job, and sometimes it does not. Sometimes you'll talk to practitioners and say, I tried to write this news announcement and I could have written it faster myself. And and then in that case, I'd say you should do that, and think of it as a tool that I use when I need it. So I don't criticize those who may be more resistant to the technology. I think it's good. I think a lot of those people are fearful of eroding their skills, and I think that's an appropriate fear. But at the same time, I think this is a technology that is here to stay, and it is that can be transformative. And I think, particularly if you are putting in a lot of direction into the prompt, now, of course, like responsible direction, with the privacy considerations and everything. But if you're putting a lot of direction in that prompt and you are deliberatively trying to get an output, I think that you're going to be much more satisfied with what it can do for you, and it'll do more in terms of content quality or predictive quality. So I think it's going to be individualistic though.
Maybe you can talk to us just a little bit more about your comment just now about eroding the significance of the PR profession and what that could look like, and maybe some guidance in terms of where we as communication leaders can truly, I guess, dig our heels in to reinforce our significance.
Well, I would say, who are the publics that you're speaking to? Largely humans. And I think human to human communication is going to be better than AI to human communication, because this the perspective. We have in the industry a concern of erosion of the industry itself and being replaced by technology. That is an age-old human concern that has been around since the Industrial Revolution. So that is nothing new. There are industries that will be radically transformed by AI that are not in PR or not in communications, and one of which I would say is accounting. Is going to be radically transformed by AI. In the medical community, there's a real discussion that AI will transform diagnostic radiology. So it's not just a concern of PR, it's a concern of many different sectors. I do think that it depends. It gets back to this over reliance. If the person is so reliant on AI that they themselves become irrelevant. So if I could pay a practitioner all of this money and they just get on an AI system and produce content, and then I could just buy the subscription and do it myself. Why would I pay them? And I say that to students sometimes, like if it's all they need is like a chat GPT account and you're just running everything through chat GPT, then what have you, why do they need you? I mean, the subscription's far less expensive. But if you're bringing in the human dimension and you're bringing in these kind of, and human emotion and human perception is very paradoxical, and we can hold, two ideas in our mind at the same time that are in conflict with each other, and it's part of our just human biologic experience, our biological experience, our cognitive experience. That requires an understanding of humanity that AI is not going to necessarily be able to provide. So again, I think AI can do some things really well. AI is a system that is predicated on pattern matching and is predicated on rules. Human communication has some of that, but it also has nuance. And I think that's what the practitioners bring. They bring nuance and they bring kind of unique insight. And so that's what I would say for the practice of PR. If anything, it makes us more necessary to maintain that human aspect than maybe many other fields that don't require that.
I like that. So if I were to summarize your whole presentation, I think what I would say is human intelligence exceeds artificial intelligence, at least right now.
It exceeds artificial intelligence in importance, and
Mhm.
it also exceeds artificial intelligence in terms. I think one of the interesting parts of AI is that it is forcing us to look at more um, more in depth what it means to be a human. And I think that reveals, a greater awareness of value added and perspective and reflection. So I think that's all things that people in communications and PR excel at.
I really like that as the end note for today. Yeah, reinforcing what it means to be a human. I think those are words to live by as it pertains to AI. So thank you, Dr. Myers.
Thank you.
So before I close out, I'm going to do a brief promo for next month's webinar. It's the second Wednesday of every month at noon Pacific time. The PR Museum, based in New York City, will be joining us to celebrate Black History Month. They will provide us with an overview of the PR Museum, how it got started, what's all in its more than 4,000 artifacts. And then they are going to focus specifically on hidden figures of PR, celebrating Black pioneers in the PR profession. So I'm really looking forward to that. Also put a pin in it. April 16 and 17, we will be hosting our Northwest Communicators Conference. This is the first time in the 20+ year history of the conference that we will be, or that we are coordinating this conference in collaboration with members of the Puget Sound chapter. So we're very excited about the scope of the talent and presentations that we'll be presenting for our membership. It's open to all. So that is my final note. I'm going to leave it at that. If there are any closing comments in the final minute, please jump in. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for joining us during your noon lunch hour. All right. Thanks, everyone.